It's I always joke about this. You don't want to get practiced. You don't want to get good at retirement, so to speak.
Good morning and welcome to the Retireable Podcast. I'm Mike Wallace.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Good morning, John.
How are you doing today?
Or it could be good evening.
Yeah,
Good
depending on
afternoon,
where
good
you're at.
night, right? Depending when you're listening and all that good stuff. So how you been today, John?
Well, considering it's the afternoon, I'm great. If it was the morning, I'm not so good. Just depends on how you want to go
I'm
with
a
it.
morning person.
Okay, fair enough.
So, it's all good. I guess
No,
it depends when you're listening and when you're recording.
For sure,
apparently, right?
I'm good. I have been getting rid of being sick for literally like 2 weeks.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it has been like, just
I can tell you're still a little stuffed up too.
Yeah.
No, it's funny you say that because my wife Amy had it. And it's just a bad cold as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what you have, but I had it for like lingering for 4 or 5 days. It's just and it was but luckily it happened over the weekend, and by Monday it was a little bit better. But geez, last Thursday or Friday it was kicking my butt.
Ours was this current version of COVID. My daughter tested positive. My wife tested positive. So
Really?
yeah. So that's what and I think that's why it's lasted so long. It's
I didn't realize that you tested positive. Well, good thing you're way across the table from me. Then
I didn't test positive. My wife did, last week. My daughter did, 4 weeks ago.
I do remember your daughter having it.
Yeah,
but I didn't know that the wife and you got it too.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Well, it's like, it's like anything else nowadays. But we're kind of looking at it going, yeah, this one lingers a little longer as far as some fatigue and some, congestion and whatnot. So, I feel good, but other than that, it's just like, my wife and I were talking about it this morning, as far as like you can go to the gym and feel okay, but then you come home and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I gotta,
the fatigue part of it, or when you're like,
with any illness,
I get that at all, as well, I should say.
The nice thing though was this morning. Now we're still recorded in Michigan, and it's still February, and depending on when you're listening to this, but it's still winter in Michigan for us. But there was nice sunshine this morning, so it was like, okay, starting to feel like the pitchers and catchers have reported spring training has started. We're starting to feel like spring is around the corner, right?
Oh, I know, it's great, and here at least, out east though, they just got slammed, 2 feet of snow and everything, and all the airlines and all that good stuff too.
It has been one of those crazy winters, It's just, good. Like I remember this being like 10, 12 years ago. My kids are, we talked about the ages of our kids, 27, 25, and 22.
Yeah.
They don't remember driving or having to get around in this type of snow, because their entire lives of when they've had their license or whatnot, we've not had this type of a level of winter
lasting though too, like you said, usually every week or two it would melt, but like literally like for weeks on end,
and you get like a week in a row where every single day there's 2 inches of snow falling, and they're driving in snowy roads and stuff.
Well, and it was so cold that it was blowing, and so then basically, even though it wasn't snowing, the roads were bad because of the wind. So no, I understand that.
Well, and you think of when they were younger, it was like, oh, they had a snow day, they didn't have to go anywhere. And now it's like, oh no, my job doesn't have a snow day. Like, no, it does not. You gotta get to work.
No, things have changed. Well, even already the extreme cold now, where too the cold days, not just the snow days.
Yeah, that's true. It is different though. It does feel different in that situation. It's kind of funny how your body gets adjusted to it. The other day it was like 40, and it was like, you saw a bunch of dudes walking around in shorts going, they're, you're like, okay, it's not that warm, but I get the sentiment,
Well, it's kind of interesting this morning because I asked my Alexa this morning. I'm like, what's the temperature today? Or what's the weather like today? And it's 12 degrees. I said, and then I said, okay, well, what's the temperature? What's the weather gonna be like today? And they're like, well, it's a high of 31 with a low of 29. And so it was 12 degrees right now. Yet they said a high of 31, a low of 21. I'm like, okay, where are they getting that information? I actually had to ask it twice because I didn't understand. I didn't believe what she said. I'm like, that's weird.
It's always funny how when you what information you're missing. It's like, I understand the purpose behind this, but it's just missing that little bit of connectivity that human response needs. It will be a high of 31, and then it'll go down to 29 overnight, but it's currently 12. It hasn't gotten, I mean, maybe,
Yeah,
somehow I got, yeah,
something's missing from that
yeah.
equation,
Well, and
but what was it?
you always do that when you're traveling. You're like, okay, I'm going to be in a warm weather area. Oh, next week, every day is rain in this warm weather area. And then you realize, well, no, that's just how the app looks. It means it's going to get 5 minutes of rain a couple of those days or 10%. It's just kind of funny how we interpret things in that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah. But they have modern technology, but they still can't track the weather oftentimes, right? When it comes down to that, it's never 100% or whatever. Sometimes it's not even whatever 70% or whatever that is. Yeah. So. So, John, I think we have a kind of a fun subject today, and actually, it's very topical because I actually have a client that we're going to be discussing this that's coming in, this morning actually in the office. But so oftentimes, one of our favorite things to do as far as advisors are concerned is retire our clients,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
and with us having decades and decades of experience between, or each of us, I should say, we have retired hundreds of people over the years, and it's fantastic. And so whenever we get those conversations, a lot of it is ramping up to it, or if you're younger, when do you want to retire, etc. But what the subject is going to be more today is like, okay, if we want to retire in the next 12 months, okay, and it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months, whatever that is. But let's say we have a goal of retiring this year,
Sure.
let's just say, or in the next
Sure.
12 months.
Sure.
What does that look like? And so it's kind of interesting because I was actually just prepping for my meeting this morning, and I have a couple that are both 62 years old,
Okay.
and they want to retire. One of them wants to retire in July, one of them wants to retire, and he'll be 63 then, and one of them wants to retire at the end of the year. And then a lot of it is not whether or not our clients can retire, and we talked about this before. A lot of it's just about lifestyle, okay, and what does that look like,
Yep.
and so what do they want to look at? So we put together projections, okay, if they want to retire and they want to retire, let's say $10,000 a month, to $11,000 a month or $12,000 a month, how long would their money last, etc. Okay.
Yep.
And so, and really what it came down to when we did some of the math with them is, at $10,000 a month, they'll be fine. At $11,000 a month, it lasts about 85, and then at 12,000, maybe 78. But that doesn't include other things. Like,
Sure.
okay, if they wanted to work part-time, for example,
Sure.
or let's say they wanted to retire, 2 years from now, what does that
Sure.
look like?
Sure.
So it's just, it's very fun for me to at least look at that first draft, when we look at that stuff. Or we oftentimes see people come in here that, they're 55 and they want to retire at 63, let's say, and you can kind of project that if they continue to do that. But now, I mean, this is real, right?
Yeah.
Basically, if we're going to make some decisions in the next 12 months, what does that look like? And, what's the lifestyle that we want to live? So let's talk a little bit about that today, John.
Well, and you don't want to get, I always joke about this. You don't want to get practiced. You don't want to get good at retirement, so to speak. You want to retire once, and it does feel abnormal because you're retiring, but you don't want to have to go back to work and go, oh, let me retire a second time or a third time because it didn't work, right? You want to retire and walk away. And so a lot of times in this conversation, what's going to sound strange on this is the finances are the easy part because we are used to talking about that. We're used to looking at the math and looking at the numbers and so many different ways you can talk about it, so many different routes you can go. But that's part of the job of figuring out how do we communicate the finances with the family in question so they understand the emotional side of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you can look at the numbers right away and go, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you have X number of dollars, your X age, this is your expenses, here's the math, right? You can look at that pretty quickly, but what does it mean functionally and how do we communicate that emotionally and whatnot? It's really one of the unique parts of this job. Like you said, it's fun, it's exciting, whatever term you want to use. Yesterday, I had the same conversation with a family and they're all the numbers lined up. What was really interesting was we started talking about the advanced planning. And one of the conversations was about some tax planning and therefore some charitable giving. And that was what drew their eye. They're like, wait a minute, we're good on all this financially. Let's talk more about how we can give money to more people and do more stuff. And so every family's going to have a little bit of a different spot of what's going to catch them, what's going to stop them or make them nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you break through that and it goes to the next level, it's really cool. So as we start talking about this, I think that's the biggest thing that we're trying to figure out early on is simply deposits and withdrawals. Most simple conversation. What are going to be your deposits in retirement? What are going to be your withdrawals? If your deposits are, $3,000 and your withdrawals are $2,000, you have $1,000 a month or $250 a week of unaccounted money. That's feels like a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
If your deposits are $10,000 a month and your withdrawals are $11,000 a month, even though you have significantly more money coming in, You don't feel like
Yeah.
you have money, right? It's deposits and withdrawals are the simple, easy way of looking at the starting point.
Well, I mean, and that's the starting point, right? Because income planning,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just the income planning in general. And one of the great things now with technology, you can actually get pretty accurate, and you can run
sure,
many different scenarios. A lot of the scenarios that we're using right now is more statistical analysis, and so they're doing the odds, right?
right,
And what are the chances given certain circumstances, and they can run definitely many different simulations,
sure,
but they're a lot more accurate now because of the technology,
right,
So we can kind of look at those things and say, especially if you're using the right type of investments to do that,
sure,
which is a whole
sure, sure.
different conversation.
Absolutely. That's a huge conversation though.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's a component though when you look at it also, there's a lot of um when people are walking through this and the average person is going to like there are people that are forced into retirement.
Mhm.
We understand that. This
Yeah.
is what we're talking about is you're in that unique situation where you have the choice to do it, right? If you have the choice to do it, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to look at your debt ratio. You're going to well, financial planning 101 says satisfy your debt before you retire, right? You don't want to have a house payment or a car payment or
You
huge
can
credit
avoid it.
cards or
Yeah,
whatnot, right?
exactly. Yeah.
If you can't, what's the plan for it? Okay. So that aside, you start talking about income, you start looking at it. One of the hard parts right now, as we're talking about it, as we're doing these projections, there's an emotional side of people going, well, I know I need this money, et cetera. But yet we're kind of recency bias. The market's been phenomenal the last, we've had a really good decade. And
Hmm.
that recency bias is something we have to look at and say, listen, can't expect it to be 20% every year.
Yeah.
You are going to get some down years. You are going to get, so we have to plan on that. And that I think is one of the big things when you start talking about retirement is figuring out where people are mentally in that spot, right?
Yeah.
The other side of the coin is I had a family the other day and they said, we have to change everything right now. We're getting ready to retire. And I was like, well, you're probably going to be retired for how many years? And they were trying to work through it. And it was like, well, the statistical retirement is 25.3 years. So you're going to have, I mean, probably going to have 25 years that we can bank on. Now, if you pass away earlier, different story, but if you live longer, different story. But if we count on 25 years, that takes them out to, in their situation, takes them out to age 90,
Yeah.
right? So that's okay. That doesn't mean you have to then put everything in the bank right now and you still have to make money if you're going to live another 25, so it's all
Yeah.
these interesting components that you have to start talking about. So
Yeah, it is interesting because obviously there's a lot of the what ifs, but
mm,
that's about the plan itself, right? But when we're dealing with just the income plan alone, a lot of it is is when we make some of those decisions too. And they talk about the retirement red zone,
yep,
which is like
yep,
the 10 years
10
before
before,
retirement and the 10 years after retirement, and where you may be able to make some significant mistakes when you're let's say 35 years old,
you could
you
lose
know.
every penny, even though you're not happy about it,
Yeah,
but you wouldn't notice it that much by
but
the
you
time you're
make a
60.
significant mistake the year before you retire. We
It's
always
gonna,
talk about the stuff that happened in 2008, right? All these
yep,
people thought they had enough money, and then all of a
yep,
sudden, they were out of a job, or
yep,
the market dropped significantly, and they had to go back to work, or had to help their children. There's
yep.
lots of different things that happen, and we just want to avoid some of those mistakes that we see. And so a lot of it is about the plan in general. And again, and it's not just the income plan. There's other things, other components to that too.
Well, when you look at it, and we saw somebody the other day that kind of explained it this way, and I thought he did a nice job simplifying it. It's like you have your income plan, you have your emergency plan, you have your fun plan. You can break it down any way you want. You have different plans, but like the income is the one that's most prevalent,
Yeah,
right? It's if I don't have income, it's like Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you think of the pyramid. If you don't have food and shelter, you're not worried about can I be a good painter or am I very artistic? You don't care if you
yeah,
don't have food and shelter, right? It's
yeah.
it's a you have to
Or where am
go
I going to travel next week if I
correct.
can't
I
eat?
can't pay if I can't pay my bills,
Yeah.
yeah. So in that situation, the income plan is to and what's really interesting about it, Mike, is if you look at the statistics, almost every single person, whether you're listening to this or whether it's someone we meet or whatnot, almost everyone, regardless of the value of money they have, the number of zeros behind their name, has an income concern. Now, when you talk through people, there are some people that'll feel a little bit less or more angst about it, but almost everyone needs that conversation of what would it look like? How does it work? And is it sustainable? Right. I
Yeah.
mean, and so I think that's a big conversation to have. Now, as you're talking through it, everybody's situation is different, right? you can piece it together in your mind and go, hey, roughly 4% withdrawal. I got,
Yeah.
$3 million. That's 120,000. I mean, you could piece together some things and try and make it, yeah, I should feel okay. But reality of it is that's not exactly how it works. You have to walk through all the different components
Well,
of it.
and it's funny you say that because oftentimes it's the higher net worth individuals that we work with, the middle class millionaires that have this lifestyle, never had to worry about income,
Yes.
and they're the ones that are like, okay, can I continue this lifestyle?
Yeah.
Where the other individuals that have lived on a budget their entire years are used to it, and they're not big spenders oftentimes, and they know the Social Security alone, maybe
Yeah.
in a small
Yeah. Yeah.
pension, they have enough coming in, and they're not as worried. So
Well,
it's
well,
interesting.
well, and you think about it in that situation. I have a client that it's just simple numbers. It's like brings in 6,000 a month, which is $72,000 a year, which a lot of people would say that's middle class,
Yeah,
right? But then spends about 2,000 a month. So it's like 72 to 24. Well, I got $4,000 a month of unaccounted for money,
yeah,
and that lets that person's never had that before. They feel like the richest person
they're
in
living
Babylon,
large. Yeah,
right? It's like
exactly.
it's unbelievable. But yeah, it's really interesting. You'll sit down with families. The other part about this is keeping in mind, okay, you're going to retire. What are the steps? Where
Yeah,
where are we going to go? What are the things? Well, figuring out what that is part of it, right? Most people say, well, we spend this much right now.
mm,
Okay, we don't want to talk about a budget, but we at least have to have a generic conversation about it. That's step one. If you're walking and going, hey, we're used to just spending money everywhere, and we're going to need, like you said, the difference between we're going to need $12,000 a month, and it's only going to last till we're 78. Then maybe we need to have a bigger conversation on
yeah,
budget, right?
exactly.
Right there's a hey, but the other side of it that's really interesting. Have you ever seen anybody spend what they expected they were going to spend? It's rare to me. Like it
Yeah.
goes down over time.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially the older they get,
Yeah.
oftentimes, they talk
You're not
about,
taking as many trips, or
yeah,
you're not spending as much money. You're not eating out as often. You're not. So
yeah. So there's a lot of things that kind of can come into play, for that as well, and they talk about, the go-go years, right? The
yeah,
first 10 years of retirement. And
yeah.
oftentimes you're spending a lot more,
Yes. Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
while you
Yep.
can. And
Yep.
then maybe if you make it to that second decade, it's going to be
Your
the
slow
slow.
boat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Where you may slow down and may not spend as much money. And then if you do make it to that third decade, it is that, they call it the no-go years,
Yeah.
where you really may not do as much.
Yeah.
So, but how do you budget that out? That's the hard part,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and again, in that situation, as you start going through it, right, you start looking, going, okay, well, if I knew I was living 3 decades, I would probably push my Social Security out as far as possible because it's going to grow.
yeah.
But since that's not guaranteed to me, do I take my Social Security early on and let my money grow? And there's all kinds of different. So, if you're talking about how do you do things,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
income conversation is step one. What's the income going to be? I've seen two different sides on income. There are some families that will say, I want to use my money for income, early on. And what they mean by their money is I want to use my Social Security. I want to use I want to use so I can leave as much money to the family.
Mhm.
I've seen other people say, I think I'm going to live longer. I'm very worried about the actual amount and the number. So kind of different viewpoints, but they all come back to the same thing of conversation on numbers. So figuring out the income first is step
Yeah.
one.
Well, and the income is okay. A lot of people that come through our doors will have enough to pay the bills,
Sure.
and so then it's just come down what is that lifestyle, and look at some of the numbers, like you said,
Sure.
and what's most important to them,
Well, and it's really interesting. I think you said something really important there. What does that lifestyle look like? That is part of the conversation that I'm seeing more and more nowadays. Is you're not seeing people knowing what the um, lifestyle looks like.
Yeah.
They're, well, what are you going to do in retirement? Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Well,
you're right.
we should probably figure that part out or work through that.
Yeah, and that's a lot of conversations we have too. Like, what does that perfect day in retirement look like?
Exactly.
Because then
Exactly.
you may know what some of
You
that
can build
stuff
off that.
is. Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
And so then when you're looking at that, then I think when you're looking at the numbers, I mean the technology is the key. If you can kind of, and sometimes it's just peace of mind, and not if you just put that number. Most people might know that they can retire, but without seeing the number, it's like, we're all learn differently. What's that peace of mind?
Yeah.
And we've had many people, come through our offices and they think, but they don't know,
Yeah.
and so,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
there's more
Yes.
this worry. And then you show them the numbers like, oh, and it's like this, you can like physically see in, that breath of fresh air. Like, oh
Yes.
my gosh.
The giggle almost.
Yeah,
I saw a
yeah,
giggle the other day.
yeah,
Client giggled. The wife was kinda smiling and nodding, and the husband giggled. He's like, "What?
yeah,
I thought that was the case, but now you saying it," and it is. It's a third party outside point of view, now again, the interesting part there is, just as a quick aside, if you have a long-term relationship with them, there you can say the things there. If you don't have a relationship with them, you're gonna have to back up some of the numbers because there's not as much trust there in that. There's not as much relationship equity.
yeah.
So you just saying, "Yes, you can retire," you have to back it up, but that is part of the planning, is figuring that out on the income component.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and there's some unknowns too, John.
for sure.
Like so, for example, we don't know how long the survivor is going to be there.
Correct.
So we don't know if something's going to happen to one of them or the other. So it's kind of we have to run different scenarios when it comes down to that. And is we can plan for the best and that both of you are going to live as long as possible. But if there's an income that's going to be lost, like a Social Security,
Sure.
we have to run some of those scenarios as well.
Well, and it's interesting as you start working through that, it dovetails into the other conversations, right? The income, when's the right time to take Social Security? That is
Yeah.
a full when's the right time for each person to take Social Security? But then that dovetails into, where are we at with healthcare? Are we of Medicare age? Do we have to get a supplement? Do we have Cobra? Do we have literally, if you listen to this, if we recorded this in 2025, it was one thing on healthcare. Now that we're in 2026, it's different. There's been some subsidies have gone away and healthcare
Yeah,
has
you're
changed
right.
dramatically in price. Had the conversation with a family the other day, like, hey, our healthcare literally, not the other day, it was yesterday. Client said, our healthcare is now $1,200 a month more expensive than it was before until we turned to 65. They're 64, so they kick over next year, but they're like, John, that's $15,000 we didn't budget. Now they happen to have the funds,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're like, we didn't budget that extra 15,000. Imagine people that, you know, did.
Let's unwrap that, John. There's actually
Mm,
two different things you said that I think they're really important that I want to
thank you.
emphasize a little bit. One is the healthcare, but we'll talk about that second. But also just the thought of when to take Social Security.
Sure.
That is a huge decision.
Yeah.
Is because once you make that decision, oftentimes you can't
Can't go.
change it.
Well, I mean, there's technically loopholes you
Theoretically,
can
you
go
can.
through.
Yeah, you're right. But
Yeah,
let's just
yeah,
say,
yeah.
in all fairness, and a lot of it comes down to early retirement versus waiting till 65 at least because you're on
Sure,
Medicare age. Like you
sure.
said, bridging that gap, or delaying one of the Social Securities because what happens now is if something were to happen to one of the spouses, they get the higher of the two.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes it will make sense if we do the math to delay one of them because that spouse will then get that higher amount for the
Correct, correct.
remainder of their lives.
Well,
And
it,
it's math says that they should live that long too,
well,
usually, right?
and statistics are telling us on that, just blunt honesty, women live on average 7 years longer than men, just based on statistics. Primarily in American society, the women's Social Security is going to be lower because there were times potentially where she was out of the workforce raising the kids, right?
Hmm.
That's just standard where our society has been.
Hmm.
Not kept up as much on income or whatnot in that situation. So as we kind of go through those numbers, that's where a lot of the calculation is looking at it going, who's older, who's what. If you see a spouse where the woman is significantly older than the husband, you might look at it differently than if they're the same age than if the husband is older than the wife. I mean, it is a individual conversation that is in a lot of situations an entire meeting just looking at that number and making sure you're comfortable with it, right? Because it's a different emotion talking about that versus, oh, we're talking about what are we doing with my money or what am I spending my money or how am I enjoying my trips or the different things, right? So yeah, Social Security is a really vital conversation. And there are ways to talk about optimizing it, right? It's not just, oh, I'm 62, I'm turning it on. That's not exactly the best answer for every single person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right, and even you have to consider, your income prior to those years too when you're drawing Social Security because they
Yeah.
have IRMA brackets,
Yep.
and if your income's too high, your Medicare premiums can be too high. So again, we don't have to get too in depth with that, but there's just considerations. Okay, so we talk about the Social Security, and that is a big decision, and what's also nice about that we have the technology that can run those numbers too. Like it's kind of what they call Social Security optimization.
Yep.
And then literally kind of say, okay, choice one, choice two, choice three, what are the best options
Yep.
for you and so forth, math wise. Okay.
Well, and you're looking at the math, but you're also looking at the reality, right? Hey, math says this. We have a family a few years ago, a husband and wife, and she goes, John, I know what the math says. I appreciate you running the math, but for 30 years we planned on doing it this way. I can't change 30 years for, and she goes, we're just going to do this. Is there a problem with that? Ultimately, no, because you have to figure out what's a comfort zone for everybody, right?
Well, there's a lot of decisions that are made more for comfortability or than maybe math,
Right.
would happen. And again, a lot of that has to do with some of the debt conversations
Sure, sure,
too,
sure, sure.
but the issue is, but literally a lot of times when you make some of those decisions, it's, they know, yeah, maybe it would be better off if they delay it, but I want to retire now and I want my income now and I'll live at a lower lifestyle today, knowing that, maybe the lower lifestyle for the rest of my life so that I don't have to work anymore,
Right.
so
Right.
it's just,
Well,
again,
sure,
it's
sure, sure,
making those
sure.
decisions, so it's looking at that. So basically, I think that the knowing the healthcare conversation, and even we talked about the red zone retirement,
Yep.
and so some people might have, let's say, health savings accounts or flex spending accounts that they could ramp up a little bit, prior to that to help pay for that. So those are some of the conversations you could have in your 50s, let's just
Sure,
say, and
sure.
try to max some of those out so that we can actually use some of those funds to bridge the gap between those dates. Because
Sure.
you're right, that oftentimes if you retire at 63 and 2 more years of retirement, that's an extra grand a month or so, or $1,500 a month, like you talked
Which
about,
adds up, right?
that we have to utilize. So I think that's a a big consideration.
Sure, sure. I think it's really interesting though, as you see people that are quote unquote successful in retirement, and you look at it, it's not like necessarily how much money you make, but how much you keep. It is interesting how when you see people, it's like, well, we figured out this income, we figured out everything, but it's that free floating spendable money that it's like, you'll get younger people that if you say they got $500 that they can spend on anything they want, and younger people are like, oh, I know exactly where that would go, right? Because they have bills or expenses or they're building and growing their lives, right? When you get to someone that's older, that's closer, that's in retirement, it's like, well, they got $500 and you say, and they say to you, well, I don't have any place to put it. I'm just going to put it back in the bank. And it starts to grow. People don't like, because you're not trying to grow. You're not trying to put money into a retirement account when you're retired, right? You've probably satisfied your debt. You're not taking on more debt. You're not, so it changes. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. So when we start talking about these numbers again, a lot of it's just figuring out what their comfortability is, right? If they're if their debt is satisfied, if we have an income plan and that we've decided when to take Social Security and it works for them, and then we've got the healthcare component taken care of, boy, now it gets really easy, right? Now it gets more, hey, what are we making sure we have emergency money? And then how are we spending, and planning on the next steps?
No, that's a good point as well. Is oftentimes, a lot of our clients can handle a lot of their emergency funds while they're working,
Sure,
right?
sure,
And so to build that little nest egg for the big ones, especially if you're a happy homeowner, whether it's a roof,
sure,
a
sure, sure.
furnace, um, some people like to pay cash for cars, even, whether or not that's
Well,
that's the best thing or not.
well,
But a lot of those things, yeah,
in all honesty, a lot of your emergencies in retirement are family related. Right?
true,
Because you're in retirement, you have every day to look and go, well, we haven't done this roof in 10 years. Let's budget to do this roof next year.
yeah.
It's the family that's growing and trying to do everything themselves that is living possibly paycheck to paycheck. And that's not wrong. It means they're putting money away in their retirement accounts, but they're not sitting with, $30,000 in the bank at 20 years old, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
have it invested somewhere. So they're the ones where the emergency comes in and goes, you know, dad, we need a roof, or we need mom, we need a water heater or whatnot, right? So that's where you still need the emergency money for that component.
Yeah, I know it's a consideration, a lot of that stuff. Kids and grandkids, right? You don't
Yeah.
ever know, right? You
Yeah,
know what's
yeah.
gonna happen. And now everybody's living throughout the country as well. So
Sure,
sometimes there's a lot more travel involved
sure.
than previously. So
We had a family
it's
the other day that mentioned that they're like, well, our granddaughter is winning this particular award at school. Like, we're going. We're
yeah.
we're getting on a plane and we're going. We're going to watch it there, and it's like we can, so we're going to, and it means a lot. And so it's
Yeah.
that it's like, but that's probably $2,500. They didn't budget spending,
Yeah.
but they're also
They
they're like,
can.
that's what the money's for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what they saved it for.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and again, this is not going to be a big conversation that we can have today, but we have many podcasts that talk about it as well. But there's a huge consideration with the income planning, though, with tax planning.
For sure.
Okay, because what
For
happens
sure.
is, a lot of the individuals that, especially if you don't have a pension, have these large pre-tax dollars, and so most of the money that's coming out is now taxable.
Yep.
And so, what does that do with their tax brackets? Or doing Roth conversions or making sure that you don't have large after tax money that's going to be that's going to be taxed on a yearly basis,
Absolutely, absolutely.
that you're now using your monthly income to pay taxes on money that you're not even using.
Well,
So
and not to plan is a plan, unfortunately, right? If you just let it sit out there and grow, all of a sudden you're now, 75 years old and your forced income is an extra $150,000 a year, $100,000 a year. Did calculation with a family the other day. When they both turned 75, their extra income is $346,000 a year on their RMDs if we don't do any planning. And it
yeah,
was like, how much are you spending? Well, we're not spending that plus Social Security. That's 400 some $1,000 a year. They're not.
yeah,
So it's like, and that's if both of them are here. One of them passes away, boy, they still have the same amount of money. Now the
it's a
tax bracket,
huge
so the
tax
tax
bracket. Yeah.
planning is a very, very important component. Again, not what you make, it's what you keep. Trying to minimize that tax footprint is a huge component of stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's just kind of simplify some things. And again, it can get really complicated depending on your individual circumstances. That's
Sure.
why we have jobs, right? So we
Right.
can actually individualize that plan for the
Each
people,
family.
for each
Yep.
family. Yeah, which is great. And that's, again, part of the fun we have with our
Sure. Sure.
jobs,
Sure. Sure.
is
Sure.
running those numbers and seeing what's important, and looking at and individualizing some of those portfolios, with risk and taxes, and,
Sure.
and even the estate planning part of it too. Um, but if we're simplifying it, we have to consider the health care is a big one. When to take Social
Wanted to
Security,
take, yep.
have that income plan,
Yep.
have that tax plan, and ultimately have that wealth transfer plan too in place in those important documents. So let's
Sure.
just so those some of the major things that we have to consider. Again, there's lots of other things. That's just the main
Well,
things to consider.
and then a lot of the questions, it's interesting because a lot of the questions that come up, those are the bigger picture stuff. It's interesting what the questions are. Yesterday I got a question of, well, how does it work? Like, where does how do I make sure I have the money in my bank account from my retirement account every month to pay on stuff? So that's the stuff that we don't necessarily know either, that we just have to talk through.
Yeah.
How do you want it to work? Do you want it once a month? Do you want it twice a month? Do you want it beginning of the month, end of the month? And so that's a lot of the component of talking about it, of going, hey, here's big picture stuff, but now let's talk functionally. What is
Yeah.
it? What is it functionally? How does it work?
Well, and even the timing in general, so when you're looking at that, so, let's say you're 6 to 12 months out, what do you do then?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a good time to do some of the income planning and tax planning
I
at
would
that
agree.
point, and just running some preliminary numbers, get that comfort level, etc. But then when you start getting 6 months out, then you got to start having to do some action items,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at that point, it may be you need to notify your employer at some point, right?
I think that part of it is the part that I find most interesting is, um, as people go through, every place is different, right? Like some places, you look at it, well, I need to work longer. I need to help this job, or I need to, you start talking about it. I think it's most interesting. Very rarely do I hear from anybody when they say they're going to retire and they notified their job that their job wasn't prepared for it, or that their job wasn't expecting it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you walked in and retired at 40, I guess that would be different, right? If
Yeah.
you were, but most people, they're looking going, oh no, you're of this, Bill, you're 62. We were kind of expecting, at some point. So here, and you figure it out. So it's not something that I think people should lose sleep over in that part of the conversation, but it is something that you're gonna have to talk through, right? It is
Yeah.
something to figure out, what's the exit strategy.
Well, and we talk about this work optional lifestyle,
Yeah,
right? And so
yeah,
a lot of times what happens is people retire, but then they may have be called back on contract, either part time,
sure.
or maybe they have their hobby jobs,
Yep,
et cetera. So there's a lot of
yep.
things we have to consider when it comes down to that. But you're right, a lot of that notifying the employer, and some of them have hard deadlines, like
That is true.
my wife's in the school systems, and
Yeah.
so if you're going to retire by the end of the year, you have to let them know. I think by March 1st or whatever
Okay,
that day. I don't know
okay,
what the exact date, but it's something
okay.
like that,
So she's gotta let him know within a week,
well, she's not
roughly.
retiring this year,
Oh,
but
okay,
but
okay,
maybe,
okay.
pretty soon. But yeah, but she's a couple teachers in her,
Sure,
and she's got to prepare for that, right?
sure,
So
sure.
she got to know that, or even she's actually one of her secretaries is of age, and so like, work one more year for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Get one
yeah,
more
yeah,
year out of
yeah.
you. So you have to consider that, and again, you have to be fair to the employer too, because if you need to be replaced
Sure.
too, right? So that some of that is some respect. Sometimes there's training involved
Yep.
with some of that stuff too. So yeah, you do have to look at that. make sure you're doing the health care, maybe get some health quotes, for example, or maybe it's not the health quotes because you're already Medicare age, then you may need to do some Medicare supplements,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you can get some, prepare
Have the
some of that
plan.
stuff.
Yep, 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 yep,
Apply for Medicare or Social Security,
yep,
at that point.
yep.
That's so at some point you're going to have to do that. And then, maybe have a preliminary tax plan,
Yep.
within that three to
Well,
six,
and
six
what's
months.
that step
Yeah.
on your tax plan? Am I rolling over the old accounts? Am I merging different accounts, the back retirement accounts, et cetera? How am I doing that? And what's the reasoning behind it, et cetera? Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
I think the thing that 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 is unique about this is it's not there's a generic um blueprint, but it's not the exact for every single person.
oh
Like
yeah.
step 1 might happen first for somebody, step 3 might happen first for somebody else. The job situation, the family situation. I mean, there's a lot of things that change a little bit in
Oh
that
yeah.
regard. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of stuff. And again, we had a whole podcast on just the psychology behind it, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
mentally, are you prepared? And
And yeah, what does
there
it look like? What is it?
there's a lot involved with some of that stuff too. And yeah, especially, people like me and you and I should say that love our jobs,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
not everybody ever, some people,
Well,
we come in there and they just can't wait. They wanted to retire yesterday, right?
statistically, men are a little different than women, right?
Yeah.
Men, a lot of the social component for men is through work,
Yeah.
whereas a lot of women, just statistically, they have social components outside of work, right?
Yeah.
And in that situation, that's one of the things that's interesting is okay, when a male leaves the work, what does it mean as far as his relationships and his activity level, right? I mean, just you look at you and I, we golf together a lot during the summer.
Yeah.
That means I'm not golfing with other people. Now that's not, but that's a component, right? Of are we going to continue our golf group if we're retired, or are we,
Yeah.
what I mean, you know what I'm saying? So that's something that you kind of have to figure out how it is for people, right? And figuring out what their hobbies are.
Yeah.
That for sure, that's a big point.
No, that's good. And I guess if we're looking at the crunch time, so 1 to 3 months in, then these are when some of the decisions have to be made, and sometimes it doesn't really even have to be made until after retirement
Sure,
because some
you have
people may have a
time.
cushion
Yeah,
of cash or liquid money, so they may not need to set up
right,
income
right.
like the day they
Right.
retire, right? But at least knowing that you have the plan in place, and we have at least a preliminary. Okay, what are we going to do? Because sometimes they have large plans for their job that they
Sure,
were not able to move yet, and so they
sure.
have to, okay, how do I invest it to
What am I
generate the
doing?
right
How am I
income,
adjusting? Yep, exactly.
or if it's early retirement, especially,
Yep.
what are some of the rules behind taking my distributions,
When and how to do it
or you
exactly.
may have one a spouse that may be over 59 and a half and one that's not,
Yep,
so
yep.
there's lots of considerations when it comes down to that, but having that plan, I think, in place, but I guess more importantly than anything else is I guess the theme of why we're advisors is just having a plan.
Yeah. I think the idea of a plan means it's going to change, it's going to adjust, right? It's planning, an action verb. But yeah, just having, and again, so much of it, you see people all the time. They're like, "Well, I have this amount of money. Why do I need a plan? Why do I need stuff?" Because there's so many little parts that might or might not work out if you're not talking through it, right? You can look online about all the ideas of tax planning, but if you don't know the strategies, if you're not interacting with the strategies, if you're not looking at them and how they change each year, and why would you want to do that? Because that's another job, right? Why wouldn't you just have someone else do that? It's kind of funny. I was talking with a family the other day, and he's like, John, he goes, I know this sounds silly. He goes, but working with you is not costing me much more money than when I was doing it on my own. He said, "So based on the dollar amount, why would I not work with you?" And it is that's a unique point of when you're looking at it going, "Yeah, why wouldn't you have the plan together? Why wouldn't you organize and do it? Why wouldn't you use that relationship of somebody we may not be the smartest thing in any subject matter, but on the other side of the coin, we've worked with thousands of clients over the years, and so we've seen people do it right, and we've seen people do it wrong, and we've seen people everywhere in between. And so we may not say this is exactly how you have to do it, but we can say these are 6 other ways we've seen it done. What fits best for you?
Yeah, well, and oftentimes when we do the math, we'll say, okay, well, yes, maybe the percentage per year maybe cost more, but even your net to you is more.
Sure.
But especially when it comes to the tax planning, okay, well, we do Roth conversions, that means $100,000 to you. We do, some tax planning or some, tax loss harvesting. That's another 100,000. So over your life expectancy, it actually is now, worth sometimes, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to the clients
Yeah.
by just having a plan in place.
We had an adjustment with a client a few, and he said it bluntly. He goes, he goes, John, all of these things are great. He goes, I'd probably be okay without it. He goes, but I was able to call you guys when something wasn't going well, and I don't have to think about it again. You guys are you his wife is having some health issues. He's like, "I don't wanna have to think about that. I wanna be there with her, and I cannot stress how important it is that I have you guys working on these other things I don't have to think about." And I think that's the thing with a plan, and whether it's planning with people or plan it's I have something that makes me sleep at night, right?
The peace of mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have a plan for how you get to work so that you don't have to every morning think about how you're getting to work. I know I drive these roads. It's one less stressor, right? We only have so much
Yeah.
bandwidth in our life, and a plan on retiring those steps is really important.
No, I think that's fantastic. And well, how do they get a plan, John?
Well, they can reach out to us if they want to talk to us. They can reach out. You can call us 1-800-977-9292, or they can reach us at the website.
Yep, it's fsa1.com. And what's also great, either, John Sauger or Mike Wallace, if you want to even book a complimentary appointment directly with us, our calendars are on there as well. Or you can just reach out and either by email or through the phone number, and set something up if you'd like. And obviously, it's one of the passions that we have, and this is one
Absolutely,
of the fun subjects that
absolutely,
we like to talk
absolutely.
about as well.
So let's do this. We always wrap up with our holistic happenings. And
Yeah.
holistic happenings is again, if you haven't listened before, we consider ourselves a holistic planning company, meaning we don't just talk about finances, we talk about all things holistically combined with retirement. We talk about estate planning and tax planning and financial planning and insurance planning and all these different components and how they merge together. And so in that situation, we usually follow up with just something that we've seen in the last week that we just pull off the top of the cuff because we see it so often. So, Mike, do you have anything holistic happenings that you've seen in the last
Well,
week or two?
actually, I have one that's actually a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about. And this just happened actually yesterday. I met with a family, and the originally when I met with them, I didn't meet them too long ago, last fall, and um, everything was fine, and they came in just to do a little bit of a checkup. But what happened was the husband's health has turned, and he's the
Mm,
first time ever.
okay.
So they thought they were going to retire a few years down the road,
Sure.
and now that the health has changed, and so she's worried, of
Sure.
course, and again, it may, I didn't get the exact what's happening yet,
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
I got the preliminary part of
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
but now it's now thinking about, okay, we were looking at down the road, but then, there's two things that she's looking at right now, and we're going to put together the plan for it. But the plan now is first of all, if they want to now move up that retirement date, okay,
Sure.
because we didn't look at those numbers last fall. We're now looking that,
Yeah, yeah. What
can
did my numbers
what
do?
does it look
Yeah,
like if I
yeah.
want to retire earlier?
Yep.
What does that look like? And then also doing more of a survivorship. And so I don't know. I've been thinking that it might be a little bit that she's
Different.
worried. She doesn't
Yeah.
know, and maybe I don't know how bad it is or not. But basically, putting
What?
the numbers for the survivorship plan and
Yeah.
just giving that little bit of more peace
Well,
of
peace of mind for
mind
both of them. Peace
when
of
it
mind for both of them,
when it
right?
comes
In that
down to that,
situation. Absolutely.
and with her, and they're younger, they're in their early 60s, and the husband was their blended family was a little bit they're struggling with their estate plan,
Okay.
so that's the gist of it is that we're now going to that's the one thing that's the non-negotiable. The
Sure.
next time they come in, they're going to do the estate plan
Sure, sure, sure.
and get that done
Get
as
that taken care
well.
of.
So so now it's amazing how just like one incident can change a whole plan, but we already have a plan. We just got to now adjust it and pivot.
Yep. Yep.
But also, what does those numbers look like? And so I think the importance of that is, and we've seen it as well. We've seen buyouts. We've seen people that plan on working longer, and they're
Sure,
offering
sure.
buyouts,
Sure.
and we have to look at these numbers, and we can kind of look at that. But I think in general is, um, what I liked about what we do oftentimes with our clients, and it could be even 3 years, 5 years out, is that first draft. What does that first draft of retirement look like?
Sure.
We're talking about retiring in the next 12 months, but if you have that plan and you knew the plan ahead of time,
Yep.
then if you do have to make that short term pivot, it's a lot easier.
Yep.
But if you never had that
The
first
start.
draft, or
Yep.
you never had the goal to begin with,
Yep.
even
Or if it wasn't realistic, you had it 25 years ago before you had kids or were married to the same person or what. Yeah.
yeah. So it's now looking at it through a different lens, but also making sure that um, we continue, the needs will always or could potentially change, right? Or they'll evolve over
Yeah,
time,
yeah, that's a
right?
good way of saying it.
And so now we just have to be able to make sure that we have the necessary tools in place to do that. And if not, though, what
What
are
do
the
we have to adjust?
alternatives?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, what do we have to adjust? So,
So I thought that was kind of
yeah, that is
topical.
absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a great way to end it there. I think it's a good spot. So, again, if you want to reach out to us, the phone number is
1-800-977-9292.
the website is FSA and the number 1.com.
This is the Retireable Podcast. I'm Mike Wallace.
And I'm John Sauger.
Have a wonderful day.
Investment advisory products and services are made available through FSA Advisors, FSAA, a registered investment advisor. Annuity and insurance products are offered through Financial Services of America, Financial Services of America, FSA Health Insurance Agency, doing business as FSA Insurance Agency, FSA Tax and Accounting, and FSA Advisors are commonly owned and operated by FSA Marketing Incorporated, FSAM. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. The insurance products offered by Financial Services of America FSA are not subject to investment advisory requirements. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. FSA. A is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. Chartered Retirement Planning. Counselor and CRPC are trademarks or registered service marks of the College for Financial Planning in the United States and/or other countries. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by FSAA.
This testimonial was provided by a current client of Financial Services of America and FSA Advisors. No compensation was paid for this testimonial. There are no material conflicts of interest relating to this testimonial. This testimonial reflects the experience of one client and may not be representative of the experience of other clients. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Individual results may vary based on market conditions, individual circumstances, and investment objectives. The client providing this testimonial received no compensation, financial or otherwise, for providing this statement. The testimonial was provided voluntarily and reflects the client's genuine experience with our advisory services. Investment advisory services involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. No guarantee of investment performance or outcomes is implied by this testimonial.